The Florida sun was already throwing a humid blanket over Celebration Avenue. It was barely past 7, and the air, thick enough to chew, promised another scorcher. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, the bitter brew a necessary jolt to my system before the day officially began. The porch was my sanctuary, a small, withered space where I could ease into the morning before confronting the unique challenges of living in a meticulously planned community. Below me, stretched out on the impossibly green, uniformly cut lawn, was Max. He was a golden retriever mix, a glorious mutt with a perpetual grin and an uncanny ability to find the comfiest spot, regardless of its appropriateness. This morning, that spot was belly up, paws splayed, tongue lolling out, radiating a level of zen-like calm I could only dream of achieving. He let out a soft, contented grunt, a sound that always made me smile. Celebration, Florida. It was supposed to be a utopia, a place where manicured lawns met friendly waves and community spirit reigned supreme. And to be fair, sometimes it was. But that utopian facade came at a price paid in rigid rules, overzealous regulations, and a homeowners association that seemed to have nothing better to do than monitor every blade of grass and, well, every pile of, The aroma of my coffee, a dark roast from a local roaster in Kissimmee, swirled around me, mingling with the slightly metallic scent of the sprinklers, which had just kicked on. They hissed and sputtered, flinging arcs of water across the lawn, a constant reminder of the relentless battle against the Florida heat, and the HOA's commitment to lawn perfection. Max, unfazed, simply shifted slightly to avoid a direct hit. He was a simple creature, Max. He loved belly rubs, squeaky toys, and long walks, especially if those walks involved squirrels. He wasn't bothered by the HOA, by the perfectly symmetrical flower beds, or by the absurdly cheerful pastel paint schemes of the houses. He just wanted to enjoy the moment, and usually that involved finding the sunniest patch of grass and collapsing into a blissful nap. I finished my coffee, the caffeine beginning to chase away the morning fog. Maybe today would be a good day. Maybe the HOA would leave us alone. Maybe pigs would fly. Okay, probably not that last one. Then I saw it. A small, official-looking envelope nestled amongst the junk mail in the mailbox. My stomach did a little flip. It was a gut feeling, a sense of impending doom that only those who've battled the HOA can truly understand. I retrieved the envelope, the crisp white paper feeling oddly menacing in my hand. The return address was unmistakable. Celebration Homeowners Association. I sighed. Here we go again. Back on the porch, I ripped open the envelope with a mixture of dread and, honestly, a bit of anticipation. I knew, deep down, that this was going to be ridiculous. It always was. The letter, typed in a sterile, impersonal font, began with the usual platitudes about maintaining community standards and preserving property values. I skimmed through the bureaucratic jargon until I reached the meat of the matter. My eyes widened. Violation notice, pet sanitation. Okay, so far, so good. I knew the HOA had rules about picking up after your pet. I'm a responsible dog owner. I always clean up after Max. Always. But then I read on, and the absurd reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. It has come to the attention of the Celebration Homeowners Association that your canine companion, Maximilian, hereinafter referred to as Max, engaged in a bowel movement on the community lawn adjacent to your property at approximately 7:12 a.m. on Tuesday, July 18th. This action constitutes a violation of Article 4, Section 2, Subsection C of the Community Guidelines, which clearly states that pet sanitation activities are permitted only during the designated hours of 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. I stared at the letter, my jaw practically on the floor. They were fining me because Max had pooped outside of the designated poop hours? I burst out laughing. It was a loud, slightly hysterical laugh that startled a flock of birds in a nearby tree. Max, disturbed from his sun-drenched reverie, lifted his head and looked at me with a confused expression. "Sorry, buddy," I said, still chuckling, "but apparently you're a criminal, a potty training scofflaw." The letter continued, threatening a $150 fine for future violations. $150? For poop. The laughter subsided, replaced by a simmering irritation. This wasn't just absurd, it was insulting. It was the epitome of micromanagement, a blatant attempt to control every aspect of our lives, even the bodily functions of our pets. My mind started racing. What were they doing? Staking out the lawn with stopwatches and poop measuring devices. It was insane. I crumpled the letter in my hand, then smoothed it out again. I needed to think. I couldn't just roll over and pay the fine. That would be admitting defeat. And I wasn't about to be bullied by the HOA's poop patrol. I glanced at Max, who had resumed his nap, oblivious to the bureaucratic warfare being waged on his behalf. He was the picture of canine innocence, and he deserved to poop whenever his little doggy body told him to poop, not when the HOA deemed it acceptable. I needed a plan that was both effective and, well, a little bit subversive. My engineering background kicked in. I'd spent years designing complex systems, solving intricate problems. Surely, I could outsmart the HOA. The key was to frame the issue in a way they couldn't ignore, to make them see the absurdity of their rule, to expose the ridiculousness of their control. I smiled. I had an idea, a delightfully ridiculous idea. Later that morning, I walked down Market Street, the heart of celebration, toward the cafe. The air was already thick with the buzz of conversation, the clinking of coffee cups, and the general hum of a community waking up. I spotted Tom and Luis at our usual table outside Java Central. Tom, a writer with a perpetually cynical grin, was already nursing a double espresso. Luis, a lawyer with a calming presence, was sipping iced tea. They were my sounding boards, my confidants, my partners in crime, or at least in occasional mischief. "Morning, Jamie," Tom said, raising an eyebrow. "You look like you're about to declare war on someone." "You have no idea," I replied, sliding into a chair. I pulled out the HOA letter and tossed it on the table. Tom picked it up, scanned it quickly, and then erupted in laughter. "You're kidding, right? They're fining you for unauthorized defecation?" "I wish I was," I said, grimly. Apparently, Max's morning constitutional was a threat to community harmony. Tom shook his head, still chuckling. "This is gold. Pure gold. They have a poop patrol? That's amazing." Luis, ever the voice of reason, took the letter from Tom and read it more carefully. "This is unfortunate," he said, his brow furrowed. "The HOA can be quite tenacious when they feel their rules are being challenged." "Exactly," I exclaimed. "I'm not going to let them get away with this. It's not just about the fine. It's about the principle of the thing. It's about freedom. It's about Max's right to poop whenever he damn well pleases." Tom grinned. "I'm in. What's the plan?" Luis sighed. "Jamie, I understand your frustration, but be careful. The HOA has a lot of power in this town. You don't want to escalate things." "I appreciate the concern, Luis," I said, "but I can't just ignore this. I have to do something, and I have a feeling Max is on my side." I launched into my idea, explaining my plan to conduct a satirical scientific study on Max's biological rhythms. Under HOA constraints, the digital clock collar, the GoPro, the whole shebang. Tom was practically bouncing in his seat with excitement. "This is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We have to document this. I'm thinking a series of short videos. We'll call it The Adventures of Poopgate." Luis, however, looked increasingly uneasy. "Jamie, this is going to attract a lot of attention. You're going to be poking the bear. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "Someone has to stand up to these petty tyrants. And if that someone is me, armed with a GoPro and a golden retriever, then so be it." Tom raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Max, champion of canine freedom. May his poop be ever timely." Back home, I started putting my plan into action. I ordered a miniature digital clock collar online. I already had a GoPro, a trusty companion on my various adventures. And then there was the sign. I spent the afternoon designing and crafting the perfect sign. It needed to be official-looking, scientific, and just a little bit absurd. Finally, it was done. I stepped back to admire my handiwork. The sign, printed on sturdy cardboard, read, "Scientific Study. Canine Biological Clocks Under HOA Constraints. Do not disturb." Below that, in smaller print, I added, "Project Lead, Dr. Jamie Honorary. Subject, Maximilian aka Max. Hypothesis, restriction of bowel movement timing negatively impacts canine well-being." I couldn't help but laugh. It was perfect. Now, all I had to do was train Max to fake it. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, fueled by coffee and nervous energy. I attached the digital clock collar to Max, setting it to display the current time in large, clear numbers. Then, I clipped the GoPro to his harness, ensuring it had a clear view of his posterior. The sign was staked into the ground on the community lawn, right next to our property line. It was impossible to miss. Max, bless his heart, seemed to sense that something important was happening. He pranced around me, wagging his tail, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Okay, buddy," I said, kneeling down to his level. "Today, you're an actor. You're a performer. You're a poop imitator." He tilted his head, looking at me with that adorable, quizzical expression. I spent the next hour practicing with him, teaching him to stand in a specific spot, whine slightly, and look generally constipated, without actually, It wasn't easy. Max was a natural performer, but he was also a dog with a dog's needs. Finally, after a lot of treats and a few near misses, we had it. Max could convincingly fake a bathroom break on command. I looked at him, admiration swelling in my chest. He was a true artist. It was almost 7:12 a.m., the exact time of his previous offense. I gave Max the signal. He trotted over to the designated spot, stood with his legs slightly apart, and let out a pathetic little whine. The GoPro whirred to life, recording his every move. I held my breath, waiting for the HOA to pounce. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and Max pretended to poop. From behind the curtains of neighboring houses, I saw furtive glances. Whispers exchanged. A couple of people even emerged from their houses, pretending to be engrossed in their morning routines, while clearly trying to get a glimpse of our experiment. It was working. We were making a statement. We were challenging the HOA's absurd rule, and we were doing it with a golden retriever, a GoPro, and a whole lot of chutzpah. I gave Max a treat and an ear scratch. He was, without a doubt, the best dog in celebration. The best dog in Florida, perhaps. As I went inside to grab another coffee, I couldn't help but smile. The battle had begun, and I, along with my furry companion, was ready to fight. The next few days were a surreal blend of canine performance art and HOA paranoia. Every morning, Max dutifully took his place on the community lawn, digital clock glinting on his collar, GoPro dutifully recording his every whine and shift. The neighbors, initially cautious, began to embrace the spectacle. Some would wave encouragingly as they drove by. Others would leave small treats for Max, deposited discreetly near the sign. One woman even brought him a custom-made bandana that read, "Poop Freedom Fighter." Tom, true to his word, was creating a viral sensation. He edited the GoPro footage into short, hilarious videos, dubbing the whole thing Max's Oscar-worthy performance. He uploaded them to YouTube and various social media platforms, where they quickly gained traction. The comments section was a mix of outrage at the HOA and amusement at our blatant defiance. Several people even shared their own HOA horror stories. Luis, while still expressing concern, couldn't help but crack a smile whenever he saw Max performing. He'd stop by in the mornings, offering words of encouragement and warnings about Karen. Karen, the undisputed queen of the HOA, a woman whose very name evoked a sense of dread in the hearts of many Celebration residents. She was the enforcer, the rule follower, the one who knew every obscure clause in the community guidelines, and wasn't afraid to wield them like a weapon. And I knew, deep down, that she wouldn't let this go. She wouldn't tolerate our blatant mockery of her precious rules. One afternoon, Luis stopped by my porch, a worried look on his face. "Jamie, you need to be careful," he said, lowering his voice. "I heard Karen talking at the post office. She's not happy. She's calling your study a public nuisance and a deliberate attempt to undermine community standards. Let her, I said, shrugging. She can call it whatever she wants. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm just conducting a scientific study. But she's talking about escalating things, Louise continued. She's mentioned fines, legal action, even confiscation. Confiscation? I asked, incredulous. Of what? Max, the GoPro, my sign, all of the above, Louise said grimly. I laughed, but a chill ran down my spine. This was getting serious. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening at the community center, a sterile, fluorescent-lit room that always felt more like a dentist's office than a place for community gatherings. I knew I had to attend. I had to defend Max's honor and my right to conduct a satirical scientific study on my own front lawn. I arrived at the community center to find it packed. Word had clearly gotten around about Poopgate, and everyone wanted to witness the showdown. Karen, perched at the head of the table, looked like she was about to explode. Her face was flushed, her lips were pursed, and her clipboard was clutched tightly in her hand, as if it were a shield against the chaos that was about to erupt. The meeting started with the usual droning agenda items: lawn maintenance, landscaping updates, tree trimming schedules. I sat patiently, waiting for my moment. Finally, Karen cleared her throat and announced, "The next item on the agenda is a discussion of recent violations of the community guidelines regarding pet sanitation." She paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at me. Specifically, the unauthorized scientific study being conducted at 123 Celebration Avenue. A murmur rippled through the room. All eyes were on me. "Mrs. Davies," Karen began, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Your so-called study is a clear violation of multiple community guidelines. It's disruptive, it's unsightly, and it's frankly quite bizarre." "With all due respect, Karen," I said, standing up, "I disagree. My study is perfectly harmless. In fact, it's educational. It's raising awareness about the importance of flexible pet sanitation schedules." "But your dog isn't even producing anything," someone shouted from the back of the room. "Exactly," I replied, turning to face the crowd. "That's the beauty of it. My study is completely waste-free. It's a win-win for everyone. Max gets to pretend to poop, and the community gets to maintain its pristine, poop-free environment." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Even a few of the more conservative residents couldn't help but chuckle. Karen, however, was not amused. "This is not a laughing matter," she said, her voice rising. "We have rules for a reason. We need to maintain order and hygiene in this community. But are those rules practical?" I countered. "Are they fair? Are they actually improving our quality of life, or are they just making us all miserable?" "The rules are in place to protect the community," Karen insisted. "But what about our freedom?" I asked. "What about our right to express ourselves? What about Max's right to poop whenever he needs to poop?" A chorus of here's erupted from the crowd. I could feel the momentum shifting in my favor. The debate raged on for another hour, with residents voicing their opinions on both sides. Some supported Karen in her strict adherence to the rules. Others sided with me, arguing for more flexibility and common sense. Finally, Karen, clearly frustrated, brought the meeting to a close. "We will take this matter under advisement," she said, her voice tight, "and we will issue a formal response in due course." As I left the community center, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and elation. I had made my point. I had challenged the HOA's authority, and I had garnered a surprising amount of support from my fellow residents. The next morning, I found Karen waiting for me on my front lawn. She stood with her arms crossed, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hand, her eyes blazing with anger. "Mrs. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "this has gone far enough. Your unauthorized filming is a clear violation of Community Guideline 7 Bytes. We have a strict policy against any kind of commercial filming on community property." "Commercial filming?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Karen, I'm not making a movie. I'm conducting a scientific study. It's educational. It's for the good of the community. You're mocking our regulations," she accused. "You're making a mockery of the entire HOA." Maybe the HOA deserves to be mocked, I said, shrugging. Karen's face turned even redder. We have the right to confiscate your camera, she threatened, and your sign, and anything else that we deem to be in violation of the community guidelines. Just then, Max, sensing the tension, wandered over and yawned dramatically, stretching out his paws and looking utterly bored. It was a perfectly timed performance. Karen's eyes narrowed. Even your dog is mocking me, she muttered. He's just tired, I said, grinning. All this scientific research can be exhausting. This is not over, Mrs. Davies, Karen said, her voice trembling with rage. I will not rest until you are brought to justice. She turned and stormed away, her clipboard flapping in the wind. Later that day, I received another official notice from the HOA. This one was even more ominous than the first. Effective immediately, it read, all unauthorized signs and cameras are strictly prohibited on community property. Any such items will be subject to immediate confiscation without prior warning. The battle had officially escalated. They were coming for my sign. They were coming for my GoPro. They were coming for Max. And I, armed with my wits, my engineering skills, and my unwavering love for my dog, was ready to meet them head-on. I looked at Max, lounging serenely on the porch, completely oblivious to the war being waged on his behalf. Don't worry, buddy, I said, scratching him behind the ears. We're not going down without a fight. I knew that this was going to be a long, drawn-out battle, but I also knew that I was fighting for something important. I was fighting for freedom. I was fighting for individuality, and I was fighting for Max's right to poop whenever his little doggy body told him to poop. The confiscation threat hung heavy in the air. I knew Karen wouldn't hesitate to make good on her promise. I needed to protect my sign, my GoPro, and most importantly, Max. But I also needed to continue my protest. I needed to find a way to challenge the HOA without directly violating their new, draconian rules. As I stood on the lawn, contemplating the situation, my eyes fell upon the sanitation traps. These contraptions were the latest weapon in the HOA's arsenal, small, discrete paper squares, embedded with sensors designed to detect, well, you can guess. They were strategically placed around the community lawn, silently monitoring for any unauthorized deposits. I couldn't help but laugh. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost comical. High-tech poop traps, deployed to catch a golden retriever in the act. It was like something out of a spy movie, only infinitely more ridiculous. I walked over to Max, who was sniffing inquisitively at one of the traps. I stroked his fur, feeling the soft warmth beneath my hand. They're really going all out, aren't they, buddy? I said, shaking my head. Spending our HOA dues on poop sensors. It's unbelievable. Just then, I noticed a small, official-looking envelope tucked under one of the traps. My heart sank. I knew what it was before I even picked it up. It was a fine. A $100 fine for continued violations of the community guidelines regarding pet sanitation. I crumpled the letter in my fist, then smoothed it out again. I was starting to get really angry. Okay, that's it, I said, my voice low and determined. They want a war? They're going to get a war. That evening, I spent hours in my garage, surrounded by cardboard boxes, duct tape, and power tools. I was on a mission. I was determined to outsmart the HOA, to expose their ridiculous rules, and to reclaim our freedom. My plan was simple, yet audacious. I would create a life-sized replica of Max, a decoy dog, designed to trick the sanitation traps and torment Karen into a state of apoplectic rage. I started by sketching out a design on a large sheet of cardboard. I wanted the decoy to be as realistic as possible, capturing Max's distinctive features and his signature goofy grin. I carefully cut out the various pieces of cardboard, shaping them and bending them to create the body, head, and legs of my canine doppelganger. I used duct tape to hold everything together, reinforcing the joints and adding extra stability. Then came the fun part, the painting. I mixed and matched various shades of brown and gold, carefully replicating Max's beautiful coat. I paid special attention to his eyes, giving them a bright, intelligent sparkle. Finally, after hours of painstaking work, it was done. I stepped back to admire my creation. It was impressive. It wasn't perfect, but it was surprisingly realistic, especially from a distance. But I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to add a few extra touches to really sell the illusion. I installed a small speaker inside the decoy, connected to a timer. The speaker would emit periodic whines and panting sounds, adding an extra layer of realism. And, of course, I needed a sign. This sign would be even more audacious than the first. It would be a direct challenge to the HOA, a blatant mockery of their authority. I printed the sign on a large sheet of laminated paper. It read, "Educational model. No waste, just patience." Below that, in smaller print, I added, "This model is designed to demonstrate the principles of canine biology under constrained conditions. It is not intended to violate any community guidelines." I couldn't help but laugh. It was perfect. The next morning, I deployed my decoy on the community lawn. I carefully positioned it near the sanitation traps, ensuring that it was clearly visible from the street. Then, I waited. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. People started stopping to stare, their faces a mixture of confusion and amusement. Some would chuckle, shaking their heads. Others would pull out their phones and take pictures. Tom, of course, was in his element. He filmed the decoy from every angle, posting the videos on his social media channels. He even created a hashtag, Decoydug. Louise stopped by, a wide grin on his face. "Jamie, this is brilliant," he said. "You're a genius. But be careful. Karen is not going to like this." "I know," I said, grinning. "That's the point." Meanwhile, Max, blissfully unaware of his cardboard counterpart's activities, was napping comfortably indoors. He had no idea that he was the star of a silent, subversive revolution. As the day wore on, the decoy attracted more and more attention. People were driving by just to get a glimpse of it. Some were even bringing their own dogs to pose for pictures with it. The HOA's sanitation traps, of course, remained stubbornly inactive. The decoy produced no waste. It was, after all, just a piece of cardboard. But the message was clear. The HOA's rules were absurd. Their enforcement tactics were overzealous, and the community was not going to tolerate it any longer. That evening, I decided to take the offensive. I printed a stack of flyers titled, "Free Our Pets and HOA Poop Patrol." The flyers outlined the absurdity of the HOA's pet sanitation rules and called for a community meeting to discuss potential revisions. I grabbed Max's leash and headed out to Market Street, determined to spread the word. Max trotted happily beside me, his tail wagging enthusiastically. We walked along the bustling street, handing out flyers to anyone who would take one. Most people were receptive, nodding in agreement and expressing their own frustrations with the HOA. Sarah, a lawyer who lived down the street, stopped to chat. "Jamie, this is great," she said, taking a flyer. "I've been thinking about this for a while. There's actually a bylaw that allows residents to propose amendments to the community guidelines. All we need is a certain number of signatures on a petition." "Really?" I asked, my eyes widening. "That's amazing. We could actually change the rules." "It won't be easy," Sarah cautioned. "The HOA is going to fight us every step of the way. But if we can rally enough support, we might actually have a chance." "I'm in," I said, my voice filled with determination. "Let's do it." The next day, I set up a table in Lakeside Park, armed with a clipboard, a stack of petitions, and a sign that read, "Sign here to end the poop patrol." Max, ever the charmer, sat beside me, greeting passersby with a wagging tail and a friendly lick. He was a natural campaign manager. People flocked to the table, eager to sign the petition. Pet owners, in particular, were enthusiastic, sharing their own stories of HOA harassment and overreach. Tom stopped by, carrying a stack of free Max T-shirts that he had designed himself. He set up a makeshift stand next to my table, selling the shirts to raise money for our cause. The atmosphere was electric. It felt like a real community movement was taking shape. But I knew that it wouldn't be long before Karen and the HOA tried to shut us down. And I was right. Just as we were hitting our stride, Karen arrived, her face contorted with rage. She marched over to our table, a camera in her hand. "Mrs. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. This is a clear violation of Community Guideline 8B. You are not authorized to conduct commercial activities on community property. Commercial activities? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Karen, I'm not selling anything. I'm gathering signatures on a petition. It's a political activity. It's protected under the First Amendment. You're mocking our regulations, she accused, pointing the camera at the decoy dog. You're deliberately trying to undermine the authority of the HOA. I'm exercising my right to free speech, I countered. And I'm fighting for the freedom of my pet. I'm going to report you to the board, Karen said, her voice trembling with anger. You're going to regret this, Mrs. Davies. You know, Karen, I said, smiling sweetly. I believe there's an HOA rule against unauthorized filming on community property. Just thought I'd point that out. I raised my phone and snapped a picture of her filming us. Karen sputtered, her face turning even redder. This is not over, she said, storming away. But I knew that it was. She had lost. She had underestimated the power of the community. She had underestimated the power of a golden retriever. And she had underestimated the power of a cardboard decoy. Later that day, I received another notice from the HOA. This one was even more ridiculous than the last. Effective immediately, it read, all unapproved lawn displays are strictly prohibited on community property. Any such displays will be subject to immediate removal. They were targeting me. They were trying to silence me, but they weren't going to succeed. I knew that this was going to be a long, hard fight, but I was ready for it. I had the community behind me. I had Max by my side, and I had a cardboard decoy that was driving Karen absolutely crazy. The notice banning unapproved lawn displays was a clear shot across the bow. It was intended to intimidate, to silence me, to make me give up my fight. But it had the opposite effect. It only fueled my determination. The HOA might think they could suppress dissent with petty rules and fines, but they had seriously underestimated the resolve of a community pushed too far. I walked Max along Celebration Avenue, the setting sun painting the manicured lawns in hues of orange and gold. Fireflies blinked into existence, their tiny lights mirroring the spark of rebellion that was igniting within the community. Max's leash jangled softly, a rhythmic soundtrack to my thoughts. He deserved to roam freely, without the fear of being penalized for relieving himself at the wrong hour. This wasn't just about him. It was about the principle of freedom, about pushing back against arbitrary rules that stifled creativity and individuality. The weight of the petition clipboard felt substantial in my hand, a physical representation of the support I had garnered. I thought of all the faces I had seen, the voices I had heard, the shared frustration and determination that connected us. This was more than just a personal vendetta against the HOA. It was a community standing up for itself. That evening, I found myself on Luce's porch, the familiar creak of his swing a comforting sound. He and Sarah were helping me draft a formal petition to amend the HOA pet rules. Sarah, with her legal expertise, was proving invaluable. The key is this bylaw, she said, pointing to a section in the Community Guidelines Manual. It states that residents can propose amendments to the guidelines, and if they gather a certain number of signatures, the HOA is legally obligated to hold a vote. But Karen will fight us every step of the way, Luis cautioned, sipping his iced tea. I know, I said, but we have to try. We have to show them that we're not going to be bullied anymore. Sarah pointed out some vague wording in the current sanitation rule that could be used to strengthen our argument. The HOA regulations were so overly detailed that they left some major loopholes. Max, of course, was oblivious to our strategic planning. He chased fireflies in the yard, his happy barks punctuating our conversation. The scent of iced tea mingled with the sweet aroma of honeysuckle, creating a sense of calm amidst the brewing storm. Over the next few days, I became a fixture in Lakeside Park, clipboard in hand, soliciting signatures. Max was my trusty companion, his presence drawing people in and putting them at ease. Tom, ever the showman, held impromptu rallies outside Java Central, his booming voice echoing through Market Street, urging residents to free our pets and end the HOA poop patrol. The community forum was buzzing with activity. Pet freedom threads dominated the discussion, with neighbors sharing photos of the decoy Max. offering words of encouragement and recounting their own frustrating encounters with the HOA. The momentum was building. We were on the cusp of something big. But I knew that Karen wouldn't let us succeed without a fight. The confrontation came during a planned petition signing event at the community center. We had reserved a table in the lobby and were making good progress. With a steady stream of residents signing the petition, the energy was palpable, a sense of unity and empowerment filling the air. Suddenly, Karen appeared, flanked by two stern-faced members of the HOA board. She strode directly toward our table, her face a mask of disapproval. "Mrs. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "this activity is unauthorized. You are undermining the authority of the HOA." I calmly placed my pen on the table and looked at her. "With all due respect, Karen," I said, "we are exercising our right to petition the HOA for changes to the community guidelines. We have followed all the proper procedures, and we have gathered a significant number of signatures from residents who support our cause." Karen scoffed. "This petition is based on misinformation and misrepresentations. You are misleading the community." I picked up the petition and held it out for her to see. "These are the signatures of your neighbors, Karen," I said. "These are the people who live in this community, who pay their dues, who care about their homes and their pets. They deserve to have their voices heard." A murmur of support rippled through the crowd. People were starting to gather around, their faces a mixture of curiosity and defiance. "This is not a democracy," Karen snapped. "This is a homeowners association. We have rules, and those rules must be followed." "But what if the rules are unfair?" I asked. "What if they are outdated? What if they are not serving the best interests of the community? The rules are in place to protect property values and maintain community standards." Karen insisted. "And what about the quality of life?" I countered. "What about the happiness and well-being of the residents? What about the freedom to enjoy our pets without fear of being penalized for a perfectly natural act?" I turned to face the crowd, raising my voice so that everyone could hear. "We are not asking for special treatment," I said. "We are simply asking for common sense. We are asking for a more flexible and compassionate approach to pet sanitation. We are asking for the freedom to live our lives without being subjected to petty rules and arbitrary fines." A roar of applause erupted from the crowd. People were cheering, clapping, and raising their fists in solidarity. Even a few of the more conservative residents were nodding in agreement. Karen stood there, her face paling, her authority crumbling before her eyes. She had underestimated the power of the community. She had underestimated the power of a shared cause. And she had underestimated the power of a well-crafted petition. She turned and walked away, her two board members trailing behind her, their expressions crestfallen. As she retreated, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. We had stood up to the bully, and we had won. But I knew that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The next morning, I received another official notice from the HOA. This one was even more infuriating than the last. In addition to the $150 fine for unauthorized displays, it was a new, formal sanitation mandate detailing strict and flexible pet sanitation schedules. I sat down on my porch, sipping my coffee and stroking Max's fur. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the community was buzzing with anticipation. We had a chance to make a real difference, a chance to create a more welcoming and inclusive community for everyone. The petition had done its job. The HOA, facing mounting pressure from the community and the very real threat of a formal vote that they were almost guaranteed to lose, was forced to address the issue. They scheduled a special meeting at the community center, specifically to discuss the proposed amendments to the pet sanitation rules. The night of the meeting was electric. The community center was packed to the rafters, every seat filled, people lining the walls and spilling out into the lobby. The air crackled with anticipation and a palpable sense of hope. I walked in with Max by my side, the petition clutched firmly in my hand. The crowd parted as we made our way to the front of the room, a wave of applause washing over us. Karen, seated at the head of the table, looked pale and defeated. The two HOA board members who usually flanked her looked equally somber. They knew they were facing an uphill battle. The meeting began with the usual formalities. but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Karen cleared her throat and announced, "We will now address the proposed amendments to the community guidelines regarding pet sanitation." She reluctantly acknowledged the validity of the petition and the number of signatures we had gathered. Then, she opened the floor for discussion. One by one, residents stood up and spoke passionately about the need for more flexible and compassionate pet sanitation rules. They shared their personal experiences, their frustrations, and their hopes for a more inclusive community. Even some of the more conservative residents spoke out in favor of the amendments, admitting that the current rules were overly restrictive and unreasonable. Tom, of course, delivered a rousing speech, calling for an end to the HOA poop patrol and declaring that a dog's gotta do what a dog's gotta do. The crowd roared with laughter and applause. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, took a deep breath, and looked out at the faces in the crowd. "We are not here to tear down the HOA," I said. "We are here to build a better community, a community that is based on respect, compassion, and common sense." I presented the petition, highlighting the overwhelming support for the proposed amendments. I emphasized that we were not asking for special treatment, but simply for a more humane and flexible approach to pet sanitation. I ended my speech with a simple request: please listen to your neighbors, listen to your community, and vote to amend the pet sanitation rules. The room erupted in applause. Even Karen couldn't deny the overwhelming sentiment. The HOA board members huddled together for a few minutes, whispering amongst themselves. Finally, Karen stood up and announced, after careful consideration, "The board has decided to revise the pet sanitation rule to allow flexible pet relief hours, based on biological needs." A collective cheer went up from the crowd. People were hugging, high-fiving, and celebrating the victory. We had won. We had finally achieved our goal. Karen, her face a mask of forced politeness, tapped her pen nervously on the table. The sound echoed in the room, a small reminder that this battle had been hard-fought and that the war might not be entirely over. As I left the community center, with Max trotting happily beside me, I felt a sense of immense relief and satisfaction. We had stood up to the bully, and we had won. We had made a real difference in our community. The next morning, I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee and watching Max roam freely across the lawn. The grass sparkled with morning dew, and the scent of hibiscus filled the air. Max barked joyfully as a bird flitted across his path. He was finally free to be himself, to poop whenever his little doggy body told him to poop. The feeling of triumph was sweet, but it was also tinged with a sense of wariness. I knew that the HOA wouldn't let this defeat go unanswered. They would be back. They always were. My premonition proved correct. A new HOA notice arrived that very afternoon. This one proposed stricter pet behavior guidelines, hinting at future rules that sounded suspiciously like a ban on misleading pet replicas. I had a feeling Karen was particularly peeved about the Max decoy, and this was a calculated retaliation. I sighed. The battle might be over, but the war was far from won. I looked at Max, who was gnawing contentedly on a squeaky toy. He was oblivious to the bureaucratic machinations of the HOA, content to live in the moment, to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. I smiled. He was a constant reminder of what was truly important: freedom, individuality, and the unwavering love of a furry companion. I thought about my creative spirit. I knew that no matter what challenges the HOA threw our way, I would continue to find ways to express myself, to challenge the status quo, and to fight for the rights of Max and the community. I also thought about the community itself, the people who had rallied to our cause, who had signed the petition, who had spoken out against the HOA's overreach. They were the reason we had succeeded. They were the reason I had hope for the future. I decided to organize a pet freedom picnic at Lakeside Park, a celebration of our victory and a reminder that we needed to remain vigilant, to continue fighting for our rights. As I sat there, planning the picnic in my head, I noticed my neighbors gathering in the park, preparing for the event. Laughter echoed across the manicured lawn. One of my neighbor's dogs, a scruffy terrier named Sparky, joined Max on the lawn. They sniffed each other tentatively, then began to romp and play. chasing each other across the grass. Max let out a joyful bark, as if ready for round two, for whatever challenges the future might bring. He would always be on the front lines with me. I knew that the HOA's next move was coming, but I also knew that we were ready for it. We had the community behind us. We had Max by our side, and we had a spirit of defiance that couldn't be crushed. The freedom we had achieved might be temporary, but we would defend it with every fiber of our being. The fight, after all, was never really over, and I was ready to keep going.